Rachel Morgan began to understand that a woman could be erased from her own marriage without anyone ever forcing her out of the house on a lightly rainy evening in a suburb outside Atlanta. While she stood in the bright kitchen, her hands still scented with yellow lemon, warm butter, and rosemary, and her husband of 11 years sat at the dining table, looking down at his phone, taking only a few bites before setting his fork down as though the food in front of him was not merely cold, but somehow disappointing him. Beyond the glass door at the back of the kitchen, the rain did not fall loudly. It only slid quietly across the wooden porch, covering the lawn in a wet layer of darkness and blurring the garden lights into small halos. Their house sat in a quiet suburb north of Atlanta, where upper-middle-class families hung seasonal wreaths, cut their grass on schedule, rolled their trash bins to the curb every Tuesday night, and greeted one another with smiles polite enough that no one had to ask too deeply about what happened behind closed doors. From the outside, the Morgan house also looked like a stable life. A navy blue front door, a clean porch, 2 fern pots on either side of the steps, a living room with a cream-colored sofa, a wedding photo in a silver frame on the mantel, a wide kitchen with white stone counters and high stools arranged around the island. Rachel had once loved that kitchen. She had once thought of it as the center of the home, the place where she made soup when Daniel was sick, where she set out his birthday cake every April, where the two of them once drank wine late at night after first moving in and talked about tiny things like what color to paint the living room, whether they should get a dog, and where to place the dining table so the morning light would fall across it just right. But years later, that kitchen became the place where Rachel learned to read her husband's emotional weather through very small signs. Whether he set his keys down in the tray hard or gently, the way he pulled out his chair, whether he kissed her cheek before looking at his phone, how many seconds he looked at the food before saying thank you, the length of his sigh if she asked a question at the wrong time. That evening, she had come home after a long day at the health insurance office, where she handled files, phone calls, invoices, and the tiny mistakes that could turn into large chaos if no one fixed them. She was tired enough that her ankles ached inside her work shoes, but she still stopped at the grocery store in the rain because Daniel had texted at noon that the Horizon Project meeting was important, that he might be exhausted when he got home, that a normal dinner at home would probably help me remember why I'm doing all of this. E-message sounded both weary and tender, enough for Rachel to ignore her headache. Buy chicken, lemons, potatoes, green beans, and a bottle of sparkling water he liked. Then come home and cook as if a sufficiently thoughtful dinner could soften all the distance that had grown between them. She did not realize she was trying to pass a test. She did not realize that, for a long time now, every peaceful evening in that house had felt like an exam with no questions, while Daniel held the answer key and never told her the standard in advance. Daniel Morgan came home at 7:14. Rachel remembered the exact time because she looked at the oven clock when she heard the garage open. He was almost an hour late, but she did not mention it. Daniel did not like being greeted with reminders. He called that walking into pressure. He stepped inside in a white dress shirt, his tie loosened, his jacket folded over one arm, his hair slightly damp from the rain, his face handsome in the way of a man who had grown far too used to being listened to. He was 42, working at a communications consulting firm, specializing in helping clients shape messages, adjust images, and turn crises into stories that could be controlled. Sometimes Rachel thought that work had seeped into their marriage. Daniel did not merely talk, he positioned. He did not merely argue, he framed. If Rachel was sad, he called it a reaction. If she asked, he called it pressure. If she was silent, he called it punishment. If he hurt her, he often began by explaining why she was experiencing that pain in an immature way. That night, he brushed a kiss across her cheek, sat down at the table, thanked her for dinner in a polite voice, but kept his eyes on his phone. Rachel reminded herself not to let that disappoint her. He was tired, he had a major project, he was under pressure, he could not always be fully present. She had told herself those sentences for so many years that they had become background noise in her mind. But when he ate 2 bites, chewed slowly, and then set his fork down, she felt her back stiffen before he even spoke. "What's wrong?" she asked, keeping her voice gentle. Daniel looked at the plate, then at her with an expression that was not angry, only disappointed, and that expression had always frightened Rachel more than anger. He spoke slowly, as if saying something unfortunate but necessary. "Vanessa would have understood why this dinner matters to me." Rachel stood beside the sink, her hands still wet, water dripping down her wrist. It was not the first time he had mentioned Vanessa. That name had been appearing in their house for months now, first as a professional compliment, then as the shadow of a woman always standing between them even when she was not there. But this was the first time Daniel had used Vanessa to measure a dinner Rachel had just cooked for him, inside their own kitchen, beneath their own roof. She did not cry, she did not throw the towel down, she only stood still, feeling some very old place inside her chest being touched. Why does everything between us always have to include her name? Daniel sighed, as though the question itself had already proven what he was about to say. Maybe because she listens without turning everything into an argument. Rachel turned to look at him. For 1 second she wanted to apologize, to say she had not meant to argue, that she was only tired, that she had tried. But beneath the exhaustion, another sentence came out, sharper than she expected. No, she listens because she doesn't have to live with the consequences of your choices. Daniel went silent. The small smile at the corner of his mouth disappeared. Then he said, "This is exactly what I mean. You always make it hard to talk to you." And just like that, dinner was no longer dinner. It became evidence, not evidence of his cruelty, but in the way he told it, evidence of her difficulty. Vanessa Cole entered Rachel's marriage through compliments so harmless that Rachel had once tried to feel happy for Daniel. A few months earlier, on a late winter evening, while Rachel was folding towels in the bedroom and Daniel was taking off his watch and placing it in the leather tray, he mentioned a new person who had joined the Horizon project. Vanessa Cole, he said, strategic communications. Very sharp. She spotted the problem in the deck in 10 minutes. Rachel had asked more because she wanted Daniel to feel that she cared about his world. He said Vanessa could read a room very quickly, knew when to stay silent, when to push, and when to let other people think the idea had been theirs. At first, it was all work. Then the praise began leaving work and entering places Rachel had never invited it into. When Rachel was hurt because Daniel canceled a weekend plan at the last minute, he said, "Vanessa doesn't take things personally." When Rachel asked whether he should rest because he had been awake for 3 nights in a row, he said, "Vanessa pushes me, but in a good way. She understands momentum." When Rachel wore a pale blue dress to accompany dinner, he looked at her through the mirror and said, "Vanessa knows how to dress for a room." When she asked about their joint account because she noticed a few strange transfers for project expenses, he said, "Vanessa would call that planning, not nagging." No, see. Engli's sentence was large enough to become an explosion. But marriages do not always die from explosions. Sometimes they die from small cuts repeated over and over, each cut shallow enough that the person bleeding feels ashamed for saying it hurts. Rachel began looking at herself through Daniel's eyes, then through the eyes of a woman she had never met. She stood in front of the mirror longer, pulling her hair back and letting it fall again, wondering which version looked more intentional. She bought a structured black dress because Daniel said women like Vanessa understood that visual confidence matters. She practiced speaking less at dinners with his partners, because one time Elle had touched her knee lightly under the table when she was telling a story that went on too long, and later at home said, "You don't need to fill every silence." She read books on emotional intelligence, watched videos on active listening, practiced saying, "I hear what you're saying," instead of immediately pushing back. Some evenings, she felt proud of herself for not crying. Some evenings, she sat in the bathroom after Daniel had gone to sleep, turned on the faucet to cover the sound of her breathing, and did not understand why she felt a loss even though she had improved by his standard. Rachel met Vanessa for the first time at a rooftop cocktail event in downtown Atlanta. That night the city was damp after rain, the lights from the buildings reflecting on the street in long golden streaks. While on the hotel rooftop, men in dark suits stood beside women holding champagne glasses, talking about strategy, growth, stakeholders, and long-term trust, in voices that believed everything in the world could be managed if one used the right words. Daniel had chosen Rachel's dress, not by giving a direct order, of course. He only stood behind her as she opened the closet, looked at the navy dress she was holding, and said, "The emerald has better energy. Navy feels a little safe." Rachel wore emerald. She wore heels that made her ankles ache, put on darker lipstick than usual, and chose the gold earrings she had not worn in a long time. When they stepped onto the rooftop, Daniel placed his hand on her lower back, a gesture other people would see as intimate, while Rachel felt it as a signal of direction. He guided her through the groups, introducing her as "my wife, Rachel," sometimes adding "the steady one." as if her steadiness were a quality he owned and could use to prove his own reliability. Then Vanessa appeared. She did not come toward them like a thief in some cheap story of infidelity. No dress too revealing, no challenging glance, no victorious smile. That was exactly what made Rachel uneasy. Vanessa wore a simple but expensive black dress. Her dark brown hair pinned low, wine-red lips, her voice warm and just low enough to make other people lean in to hear her. She held out her hand. "Rachel, Daniel talks about you all the time." Rachel shook it, feeling Vanessa's hand warm, dry, firm. "I hope it's all good." Vanessa smiled. "He says you're very grounded." "He needs that, grounded." Rachel had once liked that word. That night, it sounded like a stake, driven into the earth so someone else could tie a rope to it. Daniel laughed, his hand on her back. "In my world, that's the highest compliment." Vanessa looked at Rachel's dress. Her eyes moved quickly, professionally, almost kindly. "That color really suits you. Daniel said you usually prefer safer color. This is a nice change." Rachel felt the blood drain from her face. Daniel had told Vanessa even what colors she usually wore. Maybe it was only a small sentence. But sometimes a marriage is invaded not by someone stepping into the bedroom, but by the most private details of a wife being carried out and placed on a table for another woman to comment on with a polite smile. Vanessa did not appear cruel. She asked where Rachel worked, said her job must require real patience, said Daniel was lucky to have someone keeping life stable behind the scenes. Every sentence was proper, but there was something too familiar in the way Vanessa mentioned Daniel's schedule, Daniel's project, Daniel's habits when he was stressed. She said "we" when referring to Horizon, then corrected it to the team very quickly. Rachel realized she was listening to a woman who knew her husband in a context Rachel had not been invited into. Near the end of the evening, when Rachel went to get water because the champagne was giving her a headache, she came back and saw Vanessa place her hand on Daniel's beside the railing. Only for a moment, not holding it, not stroking it, just placing her hand there, like someone who had the right to touch him to emphasize a point. Daniel did not pull away. He looked at Vanessa with an expression softer than the one he had given Rachel for months. When Vanessa saw Rachel, she withdrew her hand so naturally that if Rachel said anything, she would sound like someone imagining things. Daniel asked, "Are you okay?" Rachel nodded. That night on the way home, she said nothing. Daniel told her she was too quiet. When she said she was just tired, he replied, "I just hope you don't let insecurity ruin an important evening." She looked out the car window, watching the city slide past in the rain, and wondered when her feelings had started being named before she could understand them herself. After that event, Vanessa was no longer just a woman Daniel mentioned. She became an invisible standard in the house. Rachel asked about finances, and Daniel said Vanessa would call that planning. Rachel was sad, and Daniel said Vanessa did not spiral like that. Rachel did not want to go to a party because her mother had a medical appointment, and Daniel said Vanessa understood that relationships mattered in business. Rachel had been placed inside a competition she had never signed up for, the strangest competition in the world, where her rival did not even need to be present and still always won. She began to wonder whether she truly was petty, whether she lacked confidence, whether she had slowed Daniel down, whether he was only trying to pull her closer to the life he was building. One evening, when Daniel went upstairs to shower, his phone lit up on the kitchen table. Rachel did not intend to read it. She was holding a cloth, wiping down the stone counter, getting ready to clear the dishes. But the preview line was clear. Vanessa Cole. "Don't be too hard on her. Some women need time to catch up." Rachel stood still, the cloth in her hand. "Some women need time. Catch up." That sentence was not merely pity. It was a look from above. Another woman knew that Daniel saw Rachel as someone who needed to catch up. Rachel did not open the phone. She did not need to. One line was enough to drain the air from the kitchen. When Daniel came downstairs, his hair still damp, wearing a white t-shirt, she asked, "What do you tell Vanessa about me?" Daniel looked at the phone, saw the message, then looked at her with that familiar, tired expression. "You read my messages?" It showed on the screen. "And you stood there reading it." She felt the ground shift. It was no longer about what Vanessa had said, no longer about what Daniel had told her. The problem now was that Rachel had seen it. She said some women need time to catch up. "What am I catching up to, Daniel?" He sighed, pulled out a chair, and sat down. "Vanessa just helps me get an outside perspective. On your wife, on how to communicate with you, she has no right to that. You turn everything into forbidden territory, Rachel. I'm not allowed to talk to anyone, not allowed to ask for advice, not allowed to have a female colleague, Not allowed to breathe if you think that breath might mean something else. She stared at him, stunned by the exaggeration. I didn't say that. You don't have to. The atmosphere you create says enough. Then he softened, stepped toward her, and placed his hand on her shoulder. I want us to get better. I know you can grow. Vanessa just helps me see a few things you don't see yet. Rachel wanted to push his hand away, but part of her was still starving for his tenderness, even when it arrived after he had hurt her. That part was what shamed her most. From that day on, she began hearing Vanessa's words in Daniel's mouth. Emotional discipline, bigger vision, catch-up, supportive presence. It was as if he had learned a new language and was using it to describe every place where Rachel fell short. She no longer lived only with her husband. She lived with an invisible committee made up of Daniel and Vanessa, where each of her emotions was examined, classified, evaluated, and returned to her like work that had not passed. The first true humiliation happened in the bedroom late one night, when Rachel discovered that Daniel had sent Vanessa a recording of her crying. She had not meant to search at first. The printer was only connected to Daniel's laptop because he had reset the Wi-Fi, and Rachel needed to print several insurance forms for her mother. In the recent files folder, an audio file appeared with the name Conversation R421. She stared at it so long that the screen blurred in front of her eyes. Maybe she knew before she clicked. When the audio played, she heard her own voice, small, broken, humiliating because it was so real. I don't know what to do to make you stop looking at me like I'm a problem. Then Daniel's voice, calm, almost professional. This is what I mean. Rachel closed the laptop, but the sound kept echoing inside her head. She remembered that night. She remembered sitting on the floor beside the bed, crying because Daniel had said she turned their home into a place where he had to pass an emotional test every evening. She remembered him standing in the doorway, arms folded across his chest, not coming near her, looking at her as if she were a phenomenon that needed to be documented. And the next morning, he had sent that crying to Vanessa. Not a retelling, not a vague description. He had sent the real sound, the real breaths, the real collapse. Rachel waited for him in the bedroom, the laptop open on the bed. When Daniel walked in, she pointed at the screen. You sent this to her? Daniel looked at the file, his face not changing at first, then exhaled. Rachel, just her name. But it already carried the accusation that she was reacting incorrectly again. You let her listen to me crying. I needed someone rational. You needed an audience. No, I needed to understand how to handle this. You distort every conversation we have. Rachel heard the blood pounding in her ears. That was our bedroom. I didn't send it to humiliate you. You sent it to the woman you used to compare me to every day. Daniel moved closer, lowering his voice. Maybe if you were willing to learn from someone like her, we wouldn't be here. Rachel stepped back even though he had not touched her. Do you hear yourself? I hear myself very clearly. I hear a man who has spent 11 years trying to lift his wife up to the level of the life he's building, but every time he tries, she turns him into a villain. He said it with enough pain that an outsider might have believed him. That was the most frightening part. Daniel was not a clumsy liar. He often believed part of the story he was telling, and that belief made it persuasive. Rachel stood in the bedroom, once the most private place in her life, and felt that it had been opened for someone else to look inside. Vanessa had heard her cry. Vanessa might have analyzed her. Vanessa might have texted back that Daniel should not be too hard on her. Rachel was no longer only being compared. She was being taken outside her own marriage like a case study. After that night, Rachel entered the cruelest stage of trying, because she was not yet awake enough to leave. But she was hurt enough to believe that if she became better, Daniel would have no more reason to bring Vanessa in. She bought a gray notebook and wrote down the things she needed to fix. Do not react immediately. Do not ask too many questions when Daniel has just come home. Do not say you always or you never. Dress with intention. Do not cry in front of him. Do not let your voice shake. Do not tell work stories for too long. Do not turn your mother into a burden in conversation. Do not make dinner feel like a place where he is being observed. It was a list of self-erasure written in very neat handwriting. She went to the salon and cut her hair shorter, straighter. When the stylist asked what kind of look she wanted, she nearly said, "Whatever looks more confident," then felt her throat tight. She bought black dresses, blazers, darker lipstick. She stood in front of the mirror and practiced a gentle smile. There was one dinner with the Horizon team, and afterward Daniel said in the car, "You were much better tonight." Vanessa noticed too. Rachel looked at the rain running across the windshield. What did she say? She said you had more presence, just that sometimes your eyes still look a little defensive. Rachel turned her face away so he would not see. Vanessa was not only the standard. Vanessa was the judge. The more Rachel tried, the more Daniel found new flaws. When she dressed well, he said confidence was not about clothes. When she spoke less, he said she withdrew. When she did not cry, he said she was cold. When she asked about work, he said she was trying to perform growth. A person who is constantly compared does not only feel that she is losing, she gradually stops knowing what she had ever wanted to win. Rachel began forgetting that she had once liked soft cardigans, pale blue, evenings without makeup, cooking meals that were not beautiful but warm, speaking at length when telling a happy story. She began looking at every one of her reactions as if it were something that needed to be corrected before it could be brought into the light. One morning, she stood in front of the bathroom mirror in a black dress, straight hair, red lips, and did not think she looked ugly. She thought she looked edited. That hurt even more. Mia, Rachel's best friend, was the first person to say what Rachel had not dared to say to herself. They met at a small cafe near Rachel's office on a Saturday afternoon, where the windows were fogged, and the smells of espresso, waffles, and wet rain mingled in the air. Mia came in wearing a denim jacket, curly hair tied high, moving quickly, her eyes too sharp for Rachel to hide for long. She hugged Rachel, then held her by the shoulders longer than usual. "You've lost weight," Rachel smiled. "Probably stress." Mia looked at the black dress, the high heels, the way Rachel sat too straight, as if waiting to be graded. "This doesn't look like you. Maybe it's a better version of me." Mia did not smile. "No, you're not becoming better. You're disappearing." The sentence annoyed Rachel immediately because it was too true. She stirred her coffee, the spoon touching the side of the cup again and again. "Daniel only wants me to grow. His work is different. Vanessa is in that environment. She understands. Why does another woman get to be the standard in your marriage?" Mia asked. Rachel opened her mouth, then fell silent. Mia leaned forward. "Listen to me. He doesn't want you to grow. He wants you to doubt yourself enough that you stop doubting him." Rachel looked at her friend, feeling a small crack open in the fogged glass around her mind. Mia took out her phone. "I met Vanessa at the fundraiser last month. She asked about you." "Asked what?" "Whether you go to Daniel's events off, whether you're comfortable in high-pressure rooms, whether you're the kind of person who takes things personally." She asked like someone evaluating a candidate, not like someone curious about a colleague's wife. Rachel felt her hand go cold around the cup. Mia went on. "And this," she sent a photo. "My friend took it at a private dinner. Didn't you say Daniel told you that night was men only?" In the photo, Daniel sat at a long table in a private dining room, wearing a dark suit, smiling as he leaned toward Vanessa. Vanessa sat beside him in a wine-red dress, her hand near his wrist, a glass of wine in front of her. There was no sign of men only. Rachel stared at the image so long that Mia put a hand over hers. "You don't have to decide anything today, but don't let him convince you that your reaction is the only problem in the room." That night, Rachel did not go home right away. She parked in the lot of a pharmacy, rain falling steadily on the roof of the car, and opened calendars, receipts, event confirmation emails, public photos, all the things she had not wanted to look at because she was afraid that if she looked closely enough, her life would never return to its old shape. She found private dinners called client prep, business trips extended by one night, hotel charges on dates that matched Daniel's claims about early morning meetings, photos of Vanessa at events Daniel had said did not include spouses. But what chilled her most was not the possibility that Daniel was having an affair. An affair would have been a simpler explanation. What chilled her was the pattern. Daniel used Vanessa to make Rachel feel inferior, but very possibly, he also used Rachel to make Vanessa feel special. To Rachel, Vanessa was the more mature woman. To Vanessa, Rachel might be the clingy wife keeping Daniel trapped. The two women had been cast in opposing roles, while Daniel stood between them, seen by both as the center of the story. Rachel found the first email on the shared laptop. Daniel's secondary account was still synced in the browser, because he had once used it to print a document. She was not proud of looking, but the dignity of a person being deceived no longer lies in respecting the locks of someone who has turned the house itself into a trap. She searched Vanessa's name. At first there were work emails, Horizon documents, meeting schedule. Then a thread appeared with a subject line that seemed almost harmless. "Ray, Thursday," Vanessa wrote. "You keep telling her about me. Are you trying to make her leave first?" Rachel read the line and sat frozen. Vanessa knew, not everything, maybe, but enough to know Daniel was talking about her to Rachel. Daniel replied, "She needs to understand what growth looks like. I can't keep dragging her into the life I'm building." Vanessa, maybe she needs to see what emotional maturity looks like. Another email, you can't save someone who refuses to grow. Another, don't let guilt keep you small. Rachel felt the anger inside her change direction. Vanessa was not just the woman being used as a comparison. She had stood inside the story and pushed it forward. She had enjoyed the role of the higher woman, the sharper woman, the more mature woman, the woman helping Daniel stop feeling guilty for seeing his wife as a failed project. But the next email made Rachel stop cold. Daniel wrote to Vanessa, Rachel refuses to let me go. Every time I try to move toward what I actually want, she spiraled. She uses tears like gravity. Rachel read the word gravity and felt her throat tighten. Her tears, in the story he told Vanessa, were the gravity pulling him down. The nights she cried because he was cold. The times she begged him to tell the truth. The moments when she almost lost her voice trying to explain that she was hurt. All of it had been turned by him into a weapon she used to keep him. Vanessa replied, you told me you were done, Daniel. I am. But I can't detonate everything until Horizon closes. Timing matters. Timing matters. Rachel pushed the chair back, went into the kitchen, and poured water she could not drink. To Rachel, Daniel said Vanessa was only a colleague, a model she could learn from. To Vanessa, he said the marriage was dead, that Rachel was clingy, unstable, unwilling to let him go. Two opposite versions existed, because the two women had never spoken to each other. Rachel was hurt by being smeared. She was also hurt by realizing, for the first time, that Vanessa might not know everything. That did not make Vanessa innocent. It only made Daniel more dangerous. He did not merely lie. He distributed truth in pieces, each piece enough for the listener to build their own prison. Rachel saved the emails, took screenshots, and sent them to a new account. Then she texted Vanessa, we need to talk, without Daniel. Vanessa replied nearly 2 hours later, I don't think that's a good idea. Rachel looked at the line, then sent, he sent you recordings of me crying. Did he also tell you he still sleeps in my bed? This time, Vanessa answered after 3 minutes. Where? They met at a wine bar in Midtown where the lights were low, the tables spaced apart, and the jazz was soft enough to cover ugly conversation. Vanessa arrived on time, wearing an ivory suit, her hair loose and straight, her walk calm like someone used to entering a room and making the room adjust around. Rachel sat at a corner table, an untouched glass of water in front of her, a thin folder and a fully charged phone in her bag. Not because she planned to make a scene. She was too tired to perform cheap drama. She had come to test reality. Vanessa sat down and placed her bag on the chair beside her. I didn't come here to be humiliated. Rachel looked at her. Good. Neither did I. A very long silence followed. Vanessa spoke first. Daniel says you have a tendency to turn private matters into emotional situations. Rachel opened the folder and took out a few messages Daniel had sent her. Vanessa is just someone who understands communication better than you do. You could learn from how she handles pressure. She isn't a threat unless you decide to make her one. Rachel pushed them across the table. He told me you were the model, a woman I should learn from so I could become less difficult to live with. Vanessa read them, her face not changing at first, but her finger stopped at the edge of the paper. He told me your marriage was dead. He still comes home every night. He told me you used tears to keep him. Rachel opened her phone and played the recording. Daniel's voice came out quietly but clearly. Vanessa is useful because she makes Rachel try harder. She finally understands what she lacks when she sees someone who doesn't collapse under pressure. Vanessa froze. For the first time, her composure cracked. Not regret yet. Pride pierced. Rachel stopped the audio. He didn't compare me to you because you were perfect, she said. He compared me to you because it kept both of us reaching for him. Vanessa looked at her, lips pressed together. You think I didn't know he had a wife? I think you knew enough to be wrong, Rachel said, but maybe not enough to understand that you were being used too. Vanessa gave a soft laugh, more contempt than amusement. I'm not the kind of woman who gets used. Rachel did not answer. She had learned from Daniel that sometimes a person's sentence only needed to be left alone in the air long enough to reveal its shape. Vanessa looked down at the papers, then took out her phone. He said he would leave you after Horizon was done. He said you weren't stable, that if he left before then, you would ruin his reputation and the project. He said I was the only one who saw his real self. She set the phone on the table. Rachel read, I can't leave until the bonus structure clears. She doesn't understand what this project means. You see me without needing me to shrink. Rachel will make it ugly if she gets a reason. Rachel pushed the phone back. He told me you were only a colleague. Vanessa looked down at her wine. I believed he was trapped. Rachel said. I believed he wanted me to be better. The server came and asked whether they wanted anything else. Both of them said no. After the server left, Vanessa spoke more quietly. I posted certain things for you to see. Rachel looked at her. I know. I thought you were keeping him with guilt, and you thought hurting me would help set him free. Vanessa was silent for a long time. I thought if you saw someone understood him better, you would let go. Rachel felt anger rise inside her, but it was no longer the kind of anger that wanted to scream. It was more exhausted, older. You didn't make me let go. You helped him make me try harder. Vanessa looked at her, and this time she had no prepared answer. Then she said, I have other messages. About Horizon, about how he used the image of the two of you in front of partners, about how he called you his patient wife, while telling me you were an emotional liability. Rachel closed her eyes for 1 second. Patient wife and other roles. They left the wine bar close to 10. Without hugging, without shaking hands, without pretending to have become intimate allies. Vanessa stood under the awning, the streetlight on her face making her look more tired than her age. I'm not asking you to forgive me, Vanessa said. Rachel replied, good, because I don't have anything to give you yet. Vanessa nodded. But he can't know we met. Rachel looked at the rain falling onto the sidewalk. No, this time he doesn't get to write the next scene before we do. The following days became a cold war inside Rachel's own house. She and Vanessa compared evidence through a secondary email account. Not close, not fully trusting each other, but clear enough to understand that if each woman stood alone, Daniel would keep calling the other one the problem. Rachel sent messages where Daniel said Vanessa was just a coworker. Lines where he told Rachel to learn from Vanessa. Family dinner schedules proving he still lived like a husband. The recording where he said Vanessa was useful. Vanessa sent hotel bookings in Savannah. Messages where Daniel promised to leave Rachel after Horizon. Emails where he called Rachel unstable. And a midnight voice note in which Daniel said, I can't breathe in that house. With you I remember what it feels like to be understood. Rachel listened to that recording in her car outside her office. She did not cry. She only felt as if someone had placed a stone in her stomach. He could not breathe in the house, yet he still ate the dinners she cooked, still let her answer his mother, still let her stand beside him in company photos, still called her his patient wife when he needed an image of stability. She began meeting with a divorce attorney named Lorna Hayes, a woman in her 50s with a rough voice, a small office, and eyes that were not softened easily by beautiful story. Lorna reviewed the evidence and said, don't fight to prove he's bad. Fight to protect yourself from the story he'll tell after you leave. Rachel held on to that sentence like a prayer. Mia kept her from collapsing. Every time Rachel wanted to call Daniel and scream about what he had done to her, Mia said, don't give him a reaction to use. He lives by turning your reactions into evidence. Daniel began to sense that she was different, not because she had gone cold entirely, because she had stopped asking permission with her eyes. One night he came home and found her reading documents at the kitchen table. What are you doing? Reading. Reading what? Things I should have read a long time ago. He looked at her, a thin smile on his face. You say that like I'm hiding something. Rachel looked up. Are you sure you want the answer? Daniel was silent for 1 beat. Then he changed tactics. He became gentler. He bought flowers. He said Vanessa could be a little intense, that he understood why Rachel might feel compared. He made breakfast on Sunday morning, the eggs a little dry, the toast slightly burned, but arranged on the plate like an apology with a shape. I don't want you to think you have to compete with anyone, he said, setting coffee in front of her. Rachel looked at him. This was the version of Daniel she had once loved most. Hair slightly messy, gray t-shirt, barefoot in the kitchen, his voice soft. Part of her wanted to believe him, but she had read too much. Daniel's tenderness often appeared when an old tool stopped working. When she was afraid, he was cold. When she was awake, he was warm. Then stop putting me in a competition, she said. He took her hand. You were never supposed to compete. The sentence was so beautiful that if not for the emails, Rachel might have cried. Now she only pulled her hand away very gently. You said that too late, Daniel. He looked at her, and for the first time there was something like worry in his eyes. Not worry that she was hurt, worry that she had moved out of position. Horizon's private dinner took place in a private room at an expensive restaurant inside the St. Regis Hotel. Dark wooden walls, abstract paintings, low lights, white tablecloths, wine glasses lined up and glowing beneath the gold light. Present were 2 key partners, an internal lawyer, a finance director. the wife of one partner, Daniel, Rachel, and Vanessa. Daniel thought this was his stage. He thought Rachel had been softened by flowers and breakfast. He thought Vanessa still needed him enough to keep her role. He thought the two women were still on either side of the wall he had built between them. Rachel wore a simple black dress, not one Daniel had chosen. Vanessa arrived 5 minutes later in a wine-colored suit, her lips lighter than usual, her eyes meeting Rachel's for 1 second before looking away. There was no friendship, only confirmation. Daniel stood radiant, confident. Rachel, my patient wife, who has put up with more late nights than anyone should. People laughed politely. Rachel smiled. Patience is easier when people are honest about what the late nights are for. The laughter faltered and fell. Daniel glanced at her, still smiling, and Vanessa Cole, the sharpest mind in the room. Vanessa lifted her glass. Sharp minds ask sharper questions. Daniel paused for half a beat, then continued. Dinner began with safe conversations, but Rachel could clearly see Daniel directing the room, placing Rachel in the role of the grounded wife, Vanessa in the role of the brilliant colleague, and himself as the man deep enough to be served by both kinds of women in different ways. By the main course, Daniel said to one partner, Rachel has been learning not to take everything personally in this season. It's been good for both of us. The sentence felt like a hand placed on the back of Rachel's neck in front of strangers. This time, she did not bow her head. She set down her fork. No, I'm learning to ask why certain men need women to compete for basic respect. The room went quiet for a moment. Vanessa set down her glass. That is a useful question. Daniel looked at her, his smile strained. Vanessa enjoys provocative framing. Vanessa looked directly at him. Which version of your marriage are we discussing tonight, Daniel? The air froze. Grant, the older partner, looked from Vanessa to Daniel. His wife set down her wineglass very slowly. Daniel laughed, but this time his face did not keep up. I'm not sure this is the room for personal jokes. Rachel opened her bag and took out a thin stack of papers. Vanessa opened her phone. No one shouted. No one jumped to their feet. The calm made everything heavier. Rachel said, I won't turn private life into a performance, but because Daniel has used the image of our marriage to strengthen trust in his work, I think a few people in this room should know there are several different versions being sold at the same time. Vanessa placed her phone in front of the internal lawyer. Messages where Daniel said the marriage was dead. Rachel set down printed messages where Daniel said Vanessa was only a colleague. Vanessa showed the email where he promised to leave after Horizon. Rachel played the recording where he said Vanessa was useful because she made Rachel try harder. No one needed to read everything. They only needed to see the structure. A man had told two opposite stories, used each woman to control the other, then used them both to protect his image in front of a major project. Daniel stood. Enough. His voice was low, not a shout, but sharp. Rachel, come outside with me. The hotel hallway was colder than the private room. White light fell onto the gray carpet, and the voices inside were muffled by the thick door. Daniel turned when the door closed. Do you have any idea what you just did? Yes. You let her use you. Rachel had almost expected that exact sentence. You're still using her to talk about me. Daniel stepped closer, lowering his voice. Vanessa is not on your side. She's just trying to save herself. She knew I had a wife. She tried to hurt you. You think she's an ally? Rachel looked at him, the man who had sent her crying to Vanessa and now wanted to use Vanessa's guilt to cover his own. No, I think for once neither of us is on yours. Daniel's face tightened. You'll regret this when it's over, when you realize you destroyed your marriage because you trusted the woman who wanted to steal your husband. You still think this is about who wins you, because that's how you're acting. No, this is about me refusing to stand in front of the mirror you hold. Daniel was silent for a second. Then he softened his voice, so quickly it was frightening. Rachel, I know I was wrong to compare you. I know Vanessa complicated everything, but you and I have 11 years. Do you really want to throw all of that into a public moment like this? The sentence hurt her because those 11 years had not been entirely false. There had been mornings when he made coffee for her, nights when he held her in the hospital after they lost a child who never had the chance to be named, vacations, jokes, photos, times when he had said he loved her, and it may have been true in the moment he said it. That was what made it so cruel. The people who hurt us are rarely only monsters. If they were only monsters, we would have left sooner. Rachel said, You didn't compare me because Vanessa was better. You compared me because it made me try to prove myself, and it made her keep waiting for you to choose her. You stood between those two efforts and called it being understood. Daniel looked at her, and for the first time Rachel saw a clear flicker of fear. "I was trying to make you better." That sentence made whatever was left inside her go cold. "No, you tried to make me smaller so your emptiness would look deeper." She took off her wedding ring. Her hand did not shake as much as she thought it would. She returned to the private room, walked to the table, and placed the ring beside her plate. The sound of metal touching porcelain was very small, but in the silent room, it rang like a conclusion. "I'm sorry dinner was interrupted," Rachel said. "From now on, my attorney will handle the rest." Vanessa looked at the ring, her face pale. If some part of her had ever thought Rachel leaving would make her feel victorious, that moment did not give her that. Because Daniel was not only being abandoned by Rachel, he was also being seen by Vanessa, not as a profound man trapped between two women, but as a small man standing behind large words, using each woman to fill the emptiness inside him. The aftermath was neither clean nor fair. Vanessa withdrew from the Horizon project within a week, sending an official letter citing a conflict of interest and requesting preservation of all personal communications in case Daniel or the firm tried to smear her. The partners paused the signing, not because they had suddenly become moral, but because they hated risk. Daniel tried to tell a new version. Rachel and Vanessa had joined forces to humiliate him. Rachel had been manipulated by the woman who wanted to destroy the marriage. Vanessa was ambitious and bitter because he had not chosen her. Some people partly believed him because Daniel was still very good. He still knew how to wear a suit, how to stand in a conference room with tired but sincere eyes, how to say he had made personal mistakes but did not deserve to be turned into a manipulator. Some people avoided Rachel because they did not know what to say. Some texted, "I'm always here if you need anything," and then never appeared. Some said Vanessa was no good, as if Vanessa's guilt required Rachel to stay silent about Daniel. Rachel learned very quickly that truth does not automatically rescue the person who speaks it. It only opens a new battlefield, where everyone tries to make the truth less inconvenient for themselves. She filed for divorce, moved into the guest bedroom, then 6 weeks later moved into a small apartment in Decatur. The apartment had a narrow kitchen, a window overlooking the parking lot, and an old magnolia tree. On the first night there, Rachel sat on the floor among boxes, eating crackers with cheese because she had not found the pan yet, and cried without making a sound. Not because she wanted to go back, because she had spent 11 years living inside a system where her worth was measured by Daniel's reactions. And now that his voice was no longer in the room, she did not immediately feel free. She felt empty. Some mornings she still heard in her head, "Vanessa would have handled this better." Sometimes she put on an oversized sweater and then changed out of it because she thought she looked too ordinary, then stood in front of the closet hating herself for still hearing his voice. There were days when she missed Daniel so badly she felt like she was betraying herself. She missed the man who once brought her soup when she had a fever, the way he knew she was afraid to drive over bridges in the rain, his voice reading the news in the morning. But every warm memory dragged a cold one behind it. He sent her crying to Vanessa, he called her gravity, he said Vanessa was useful. He introduced her as his patient wife. The wound would not let her divide Daniel into two men to make him easier to process. He was both, and she had to live with that. Vanessa emailed Rachel 3 months later. "It was not long. I'm sorry for the part I played. I wanted to believe I was different from what he said you were. That made it easier to ignore what he was doing to you. I won't ask you to forgive me." Rachel read the email in the new apartment, beneath the yellow light of a cheap floor lamp, sitting on the sofa she had bought in installments. Part of her wanted to answer with every single thing Vanessa had done. The pitying messages, the vague captions, the touch on Daniel's hand at the rooftop, the fact that she had listened to the recording and still stayed. Another part understood that Vanessa, too, had been given a beautiful role by Daniel. And people can do very ugly things when they are convinced those things prove they are special. Rachel did not reply, not out of pure hatred, because she did not want to turn every wound into a new relationship, just so the story would seem meaningful. Some people can harm each other and still see the truth together without becoming friends. Vanessa left Atlanta not long after that, at least out of Daniel's circle. Some people said she took a position in Nashville. Some said she still did consulting, but no longer mentioned Horizon. Rachel did not investigate. She was tired of living around other people's versions. Daniel sent one final message after the first mediation session. "You were never like her." Rachel looked at the words for a long time. Before, that sentence could have destroyed her for a week. Now it made her smile sadly. He still did not understand, or did not want to. He still thought the wound was that she was not like Vanessa. He still placed her in front of that mirror, even after the marriage had broken. Rachel typed, "I know," then deleted it. She locked the screen and placed the phone face down. For the first time, not answering did not make her feel weak. It made her feel tired but cleaner. A few months later, Rachel stood in front of the mirror in her new apartment on a cold morning. Outside, there was thin sunlight, the kind of winter light that makes everything clearer but not warmer. She was getting ready for work, wearing gray trousers, a soft cream sweater Daniel had once called too comfortable to wear outside. Her hair natural, her lipstick very light. She looked at herself for a long time. Her face was not radiant. There was no beautiful rebirth scene. The shadows under her eyes were still there. There were tired lines at the corners of her mouth. In her gaze there was a new caution, something she had not had before or had not wanted to have. She did not feel victorious. She felt like someone who had survived a competition that had never been real. And that survival did not immediately return the woman who had been worn down over the years. Daniel was not completely destroyed. He lost horizon, lost some partners, lost his image in one certain circle. But he was still Daniel Morgan, still with a good voice, good suits, still with people who preferred the version of the story in which he was a man brought down by two complicated women. Justice did not arrive like thunder. It arrived as lawyer emails, separated accounts, divided belongings. Mornings when Rachel woke up in the small apartment and had to remind herself that no one had the right to call her original existence not enough. She opened the drawer and saw her wedding ring lying inside a small envelope. Beside it was a printed copy of Vanessa's apology email and a copy of the recording where Daniel said Vanessa was useful. She did not keep them to torture herself. She kept them because the memory of a person who has been manipulated has days when it wants to soften the truth to hurt less. Evidence helped her not go back and call the wound a misunderstanding. Rachel closed the drawer. She turned off the bedroom light, picked up her bag, and walked to the door. Before locking it, she looked back at the small apartment, messy, unfinished, with no beautiful dining table, no wedding photo, no one placing a hand on her back to guide her into a role. It did not make her happy. Not yet, maybe not for a very long time, but it did not require her to disappear in order to stay. And after a marriage in which she had been compared to another woman until she could almost no longer hear her own voice, that cold truth was the only ground she could stand on without feeling the floor move beneath her. Daniel had compared his wife to Vanessa, until Rachel nearly disappeared trying to become enough. But the woman he praised had secrets too, pride of her own, guilt of her own. And when both of them finally saw the system behind the mirror, Daniel lost the only thing he had truly protected, the mask that made him look like a man worth choosing. Rachel no longer stood in front of his mirror. But that did not make her whole. It only left her in a quieter room, with a truer face, a more guarded heart, and a knowledge she could never take off. Sometimes what hurts a woman most is not being abandoned for someone else, but being kept long enough for the man beside her to use that other woman as the measure, to use her pain as evidence, and then call the entire PR process helping her grow.